I need to get this out because what just happened 2 weeks ago is still bouncing around in my head and I'm furious. My wife Miranda's family has always looked down on me, but I never thought they'd actually pull something like this. Spoiler alert, they did. And it backfired in ways they're still trying to process. Let me back up. I've been married to Miranda for 3 years. We met at a community event 5 years ago, and honestly, things moved fast. She was nice enough at first, and I thought we had something real. Her family, though, different story. From day one, they made it clear I wasn't their first choice or their 10th choice, but Miranda seemed to push back against them, so I figured we were on the same team. I work in warehouse logistics making $38,000 a year. Not great, but it's honest work. And I've been there 7 years with steady employment. I drive a 2006 Corolla that runs fine, but has a cracked windshield. I haven't bothered fixing because it doesn't affect the safety inspection. And I had other priorities. I don't have a college degree and I'm not on LinkedIn because I'm not looking for a new job and I don't care about professional networking. Miranda's family is what you'd call comfortable. Her dad, David, runs some kind of consulting business. Her mom, Helen, doesn't work. They live in a nice house in a suburb with HOA fees and perfect lawns. Her brother, Braden, is in finance and never shuts up about his portfolio. Her sister, Brinley, married a guy who owns 3 car dealerships. They're the kind of people who talk about property values at Thanksgiving and compare their kids' test scores. I'm the kind of person who clocks in, does my job, clocks out, and doesn't think work defines my worth. We were never going to see eye to eye. The thing is, I've known for about 2 years that something was off with Miranda. Little things at first. She started spending more time with her family, less time with me. She'd go to her parents' house for dinner, 3-4 times a week, and come home late. She stopped asking me to come along, which I didn't mind at first because those dinners were torture anyway. Her mom would make passive-aggressive comments about my job. Her dad would ask when I planned to go back to school. Braden would talk about his bonuses. But then Miranda started being weird about her phone, angling it away from me, taking calls in the other room, getting texts at odd hours. I'm not an idiot. About 18 months ago, I started paying closer attention. I didn't go through her phone or hire a private investigator like some people suggested when I posted about the early warning signs on another forum. Just watched. I noticed patterns. Every Tuesday, she had book club but came home smelling like cologne. Every other Saturday, she had brunch with Brinley, but Brinley posted Instagram stories of her at home with her kids. Miranda started dressing nicer for these family dinners, doing her makeup more carefully, and she started talking about money constantly, how much we had in our joint account, what my retirement looked like, whether I'd ever inherit anything from my parents. That last one pissed me off because my parents are alive and healthy and not wealthy. But sure, let's talk about their theoretical death money. I started documenting timelines not because I wanted to catch her, but because I wanted to know what I was dealing with before I made any decisions. I'm methodical like that. It's why I'm good at my warehouse job, even if it doesn't pay great. I kept a simple list on my phone of when she said she'd be somewhere versus when she actually came home. Discrepancies in her stories, changes in her behavior, nothing crazy, just facts and dates. I also started separating my finances. We had a joint account for bills and rent, but I opened my own account and started directing my paycheck there, only transferring what we needed for shared expenses. She never noticed. Why would she? She'd stopped paying attention to me months before. Then 3 weeks ago, I got a text from David, Miranda's dad. We don't text. We barely speak at family events. The message said they were having a family dinner on Saturday, and it was important that I attend. Not a request, not an invitation with any warmth, just a flat statement that I needed to be there. Miranda didn't mention it when she got home that night. I asked her about Saturday and she said, "Oh, yeah, family dinner." Her dad wanted to talk about something, but she wasn't sure what. She was vague, dismissive. I said, "Fine, I'd go." I knew something was up. You don't get a command performance text from your father-in-law, who barely acknowledges your existence unless something major is happening. I spent that week thinking through possibilities. Were they doing an intervention about my job? Were they going to pressure me to go back to school? Was this about grandkids? Miranda and I had talked about kids early on, But the conversation had died over the last year because our marriage had basically flatlined. We barely had conversations anymore beyond logistics. Saturday came. Miranda was nervous. She kept checking her phone, changing her outfit twice, redoing her makeup. I wore jeans and a button-down shirt because I'm not going to dress up for people who think I'm beneath them no matter what I wear. We drove separately, which was weird. She said she might stay late to help clean up. Fine by me. I pulled up to her parents' house at 6 p.m. like the text said. There were 8 or 9 cars in the driveway and along the street, way more than a normal family dinner. My gut started churning, but I kept my face neutral. I walked in through the front door because it was unlocked. I stepped into the dining room and 15 people were sitting around their extended table just staring at me, not eating, not talking, just sitting there in complete silence, looking at me like I'd walked into an ambush because I had. David was at the head of the table. Helen next to him, Braden and his wife Brinley and her husband, Miranda's grandmother Jill, her uncle Curtis and his wife, some cousins I'd met once or twice, and Miranda sitting right next to her dad. This weird little smile on her face, not a reassuring smile, a smile like she was watching something she'd been looking forward to. David stood up. He cleared his throat and gestured to an empty chair at the far end of the table opposite him. He told me to sit down. I stayed standing for a second trying to figure out what fresh nightmare this was. But then I sat because I wanted to hear what they had to say. I wanted to know how far they'd go. David started talking. He thanked me for coming. He said they were all there to discuss why I wasn't good enough for Miranda. He actually said that out loud in front of 15 people. He said they'd given me 3 years to prove I could provide for their daughter and I'd failed on every metric they cared about. Helen jumped in and said, "Let's start with my job. I made $38,000 a year and their landscaper made more than me." She said this with this look on her face like she'd been saving that line up and was proud of it. Braden, sitting there in his expensive watch and tailored shirt, said, "I drove a 2006 Corolla with a cracked windshield and his girlfriend's 16-year-old brother had a nicer car." He was smirking when he said it. Brinley, sweet Brinley, who I'd always thought was at least civil, said they'd Googled me. No LinkedIn, no college degree, nothing. I was a complete nobody. She said, nobody, like I was some kind of ghost, some failure who didn't register as a real person in their world. I sat there letting them take turns. Jill, the grandmother, actually said she'd seen welfare cases with more ambition than me. Curtis, the uncle, said his son was in prison and he was more successful than me because at least he'd tried to make something of himself before he got caught. These people were saying this to my face in front of each other. Like this was normal family conversation. Like humiliating me was a bonding activity. The whole time Miranda sat there with that little smile. She didn't say anything. She didn't defend me. She didn't tell them to stop. She just sat there watching me get torn apart by her family like this was exactly what she wanted. David pulled out papers from a folder next to his plate. He slid them across the table toward me. He said, "Here's what's happening. I was going to sign a post-nuptial agreement. Miranda would get everything in a divorce. The house we rent, but apparently they were talking about future assets. Any savings, any inheritance I might ever get. I would get $5,000 in a bus ticket." He said bus ticket like it was a punchline, like I was some kind of drifter who needed to be run out of town. He said I could sign now or Miranda would file for divorce tomorrow and I'd get nothing because they had lawyers and resources and I had a 2006 Corolla with a cracked windshield. Helen said I should be grateful they were offering me anything at all. Braden said this was more than generous considering I'd wasted 3 years of Miranda's prime childbearing years. They kept talking. They kept listing my failures, my job, my car, my lack of education, my lack of ambition, my family background, working class, not connected, nobody important, my appearance. I'm average height, average build, nothing special. My hobbies, I don't really have hobbies. I work and come home and that's it. They were picking apart my entire existence like I was a problem that needed to be solved by removing me from their daughter's life. And Miranda just sat there smiling. I let them finish. I let them say everything they wanted to say. I let them think they had me cornered and humiliated and beaten down. Then I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own papers. I'd been carrying them for 6 months, waiting for the right moment. I guess this was it. I put the papers on the table in front of me. I said before I sign anything, they should all read these first. I slid them toward David. His hands started shaking when he picked them up. Actually shaking. He read the first page and his face went white. Helen leaned over to see what he was reading and she made this little noise like air being let out of a tire. Braden grabbed the papers next and his smirk disappeared completely. I sat back in my chair and waited. This was going to be fun. Okay, so the comments on my last post were insane. Thank you to everyone who told me to stand my ground and not let these people walk all over me. Shout out to the person who said my father-in-law's hands shaking was the best mental image they'd had all week. You're not wrong. It was pretty satisfying to watch. But if you thought that dinner was the end of it, buckle up because this story is nowhere near over. So there I was, sitting at the end of that table with 15 pairs of eyes on me, watching David's hands shake as he read my papers. Helen grabbed them from him, and her face went from smug to confused to angry in about 10 seconds. Braden snatched them next and started flipping through pages faster and faster, and I could see him trying to process what he was reading. The papers made their way around the table and the whole room just went completely silent except for the sound of pages turning. What were the papers? Glad you asked because I've been planning this for months and I was so ready for this moment. First page was divorce papers. I filed 3 weeks ago. Didn't tell Miranda. Didn't tell anyone. Just went to a lawyer, paid the filing fee with money from my separate account that Miranda didn't know existed and started the process. In our state, you can file for divorce without the other person's consent or knowledge. They get served eventually, but I was holding on to my copies, waiting for the right time to drop them. This dinner seemed pretty perfect. Second section was a timeline. 18 months of documentation. Every Tuesday, Miranda said she had book club. I had the dates and times she actually came home. Every Saturday, she said she was with Brinley. I had screenshots of Brinley's Instagram stories showing she was somewhere else. Every suspicious text, every weird phone call, every time she angled her phone away from me. I didn't have concrete proof of cheating because I never went through her phone or followed her. But I had enough circumstantial evidence that any divorce lawyer would have a field day with it. The pattern was clear. She was spending time somewhere else with someone else and lying about it constantly. Third section was the financial documents. 6 months ago, I opened my own bank account and started directing my paycheck there. I kept transferring exactly half of our shared bills to the joint account down to the penny. So, she never noticed, but I had statements showing I'd moved about $8,000 of my own money out of her reach. Not a lot, but enough that she couldn't claim I'd abandoned financial responsibility. I'd also removed myself as an authorized user from 2 credit cards she'd opened in both our names without asking me. Found out about those when I checked my credit report. She'd racked up about $4,000 in charges. My lawyer said because I removed my authorization before the divorce filing, I wasn't liable for that debt. Fourth section was the real kicker. Rental agreement for our apartment. We split rent 50 even though I made way less than her and the lease was in both our names. But here's the thing about leases. You can request to be removed if you provide proper documentation of separation. I'd already contacted our landlord, explained the situation, provided a copy of the divorce filing, and requested my name be removed. Landlord approved it pending Miranda's agreement or a court order. I had the letter right there in the packet. If she didn't agree to remove me from the lease, I'd take it to court. And either way, I was getting off that lease and she'd be responsible for full rent or finding a new place. David finished reading and looked up at me. He asked what I thought I was doing. I told him I was protecting myself from a family that clearly had no respect for me and a wife who'd been lying to me for over a year. Miranda finally spoke. First thing she'd said all night, she said I was being ridiculous. She hadn't done anything wrong. I was paranoid and controlling. She said the book club was real and I was just too insecure to believe her. She said her family was trying to help me and I was throwing it back in their faces. She actually tried to spin this whole ambush dinner as them trying to help me like they were doing me a favor by telling me I was worthless. I asked her to explain the Brinley situation then. All those Saturdays she was supposedly with her sister while Brinley was posting pictures at home. Miranda said Brinley left early, or she went to Brinley's house after brunch ended, or I was misremembering which Saturdays. She was scrambling. Brinley jumped in and said, yeah, sometimes she left before Brinley posted pictures or she came over later, lying for her sister right there in front of everyone. The family was circling wagons. Helen said I was being manipulative by filing for divorce without discussing it with Miranda first. I pointed out that's exactly what they were trying to do with their postnup. Trapped me in a corner and forced me to sign something without any discussion or negotiation. She said that was different because they were protecting their daughter. I said I was protecting myself from people who thought I was disposable. Braden started in on the financials. He said removing myself from the credit cards was financial abuse. Taking my own money out of the joint account was theft. I laughed. Actually laughed in his face. I told him to go ahead and report me for theft of my own paychecks. My lawyer already reviewed everything and confirmed it was legal. I'd been depositing my full share of bills every single month. I had records. If anything, Miranda opening credit cards in both our names without my knowledge was closer to fraud than what I did. Curtis, the uncle with the son in prison, said I was making a huge mistake. David and Helen had connections, lawyers, resources. They would bury me in legal fees until I gave up and gave Miranda whatever she wanted. I said, that's fine. They could try. My lawyer was working on contingency based on Miranda's behavior and her family's harassment, which was documented in my timeline. Also, wasn't it interesting that they'd planned this entire dinner to humiliate me into signing away my rights? That showed intent. That showed this wasn't about concern for their daughter. It was about control. That's when things got really heated. David stood up and said, I had no idea who I was messing with. He built his consulting business from nothing, and he knew how to handle people like me. People who got above their station and needed to be reminded where they belonged. He said I could play tough guy all I wanted, but at the end of the day, I was still a warehouse worker with a cracked windshield and no future. And Miranda deserved better. I stayed seated. I told him that's exactly what someone says when they know they've lost control of a situation. He'd invited me here to humiliate me and force me to sign papers. And instead, I came prepared with my own papers. And now he was scrambling. Miranda deserved better. Maybe she did. But she married me, lied to me for over a year, and sat there smiling while her family tore me apart, so maybe I deserve better too. Miranda started crying, actual tears running down her face. She said I was ruining everything. She loved me. She never cheated. I was destroying their family over nothing. Her mom rushed over to comfort her and glared at me like I was the villain here. Jill, the grandmother, said I should be ashamed of myself for making Miranda cry. I asked if they were ashamed for making me sit here while they listed all my failures as a human being. Silence. Brinley's husband spoke up for the first time. He asked what I wanted. What would make me drop the divorce and sign the postnup? I said nothing. There was nothing they could offer me. The marriage was over. Miranda and I hadn't had a real conversation in months. We lived in the same apartment, but we were strangers. I'd been checking out emotionally for over a year while she did whatever she was doing on all those Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings. This dinner just confirmed what I already knew. Her family would never respect me and she would never choose me over them. David tried a different approach. He sat back down and said, okay, let's talk like adults. What did I need to make this divorce easy for everyone? I get my name off the lease. We'd split whatever was in the joint account. Miranda would take her credit card debt and we'd both move on. No lawyers, no court, just a clean break. He was trying to sound reasonable now that the intimidation hadn't worked. I said no. I was going through with everything the way I'd planned it. Divorce with the timeline as evidence of her suspicious behavior. Request for her to take on the full credit card debt since she opened the cards and made the charges. Removal from the lease with her taking full responsibility for rent. Division of any joint assets with me getting my fair share. And one more thing I'd been holding back. I pulled out my phone and opened my photo gallery. Scrolled to a specific folder. Turned the phone around so David could see. Screenshots. So many screenshots. Text messages between Miranda and her family over the last 6 months. I didn't get them from her phone. I got them because we have a family phone plan that David pays for, and he's the account admin, which means all the phone records go through his account. About 8 months ago, Miranda asked me to help her dad with something on his tablet, and he'd left his account logged in. I'd seen the text records then. Every message was backed up, and I'd taken screenshots of the ones that mattered. Messages about me, about how I was dragging Miranda down, about how they needed to do something before she wasted more time with me, about planning this exact dinner. Helen texting Miranda that they'd found a lawyer who could draft a post-nup that would protect the family assets. Braden texting that he'd love to see my face when they told me what they really thought. Brinley saying she'd been wanting to tell me off for years. Curtis saying they should have done this intervention a year ago. All of it. Months of them planning to ambush and humiliate me. The table went silent again. David's face was red. Helen looked like she wanted to grab my phone and throw it across the room. Miranda was staring at me with this expression I couldn't read. Horror maybe, or anger, hard to tell. I told them I had these backed up in 3 different places. Cloud storage, a flash drive, and printed copies with my lawyer. If they tried to make this divorce difficult, if they tried to screw me over with legal fees or drag this out, I'd make sure everyone knew exactly what kind of people they were. Their church friends, their business associates, everyone in their nice suburban neighborhood. I'd show them what a coordinated harassment campaign looked like. How a whole family spent months planning to destroy someone's self-esteem for no reason other than he wasn't rich enough for them. Braden exploded. He said I was threatening them. That was blackmail. I could go to jail for extortion. I said, nope, not blackmail. Just facts. I wasn't asking for money or anything else in exchange for keeping quiet. I was just informing them that their behavior had been documented, and if they chose to make my life difficult, I'd respond accordingly. My lawyer had already reviewed this too. Telling the truth isn't blackmail. David stood up again and told me to get out of his house. I was no longer welcome. I was no longer family, and if I thought I could threaten his daughter and his family and get away with it, I had another thing coming. He'd make sure I regretted every decision I'd made tonight. I stood up, picked up my papers, told Miranda she'd be served with the divorce papers officially within the next week, and she should get her own lawyer because her family's lawyer couldn't represent both of them. Conflict of interest. Then I walked out, didn't run, didn't slam the door, just walked out like a normal person leaving a normal dinner. I sat in my Corolla for a minute before starting it. My hands were shaking now after it was over because the adrenaline was wearing off. I'd done it. I'd faced all of them and I'd won that round. But I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. I drove back to our apartment. Miranda's car wasn't there yet. I packed a bag with enough clothes and essentials for a week and loaded it in my car. I wasn't staying in that apartment. I'd been prepared for this too. I had a friend from work, another guy in the warehouse, who said I could crash on his couch for as long as I needed. Alan, good guy. Didn't ask questions, just said he had space if I needed it. I left the keys to the apartment on the kitchen counter. My name was coming off the lease anyway. I took my laptop, my important documents, my clothes, and some personal items. Left everything else. Didn't matter. I was pulling out of the parking lot when Miranda called. I didn't answer. She called 4 more times. Then texts started coming in. I need to talk to you. This is insane. Come back to the apartment. We can work this out. You're making a huge mistake. My family is furious and you need to fix this. That last one made me laugh. I needed to fix this. I wasn't the one who planned an ambush dinner. I'm at Alan's place now. It's been a week and a half since the dinner. Miranda has called me 37 times. I counted. I've answered exactly 0. She sent probably 60 texts. Her family has started reaching out too. Brinley sent me a long message about how I'm tearing the family apart and Miranda is devastated and I need to think about what I'm doing. Braden sent me a text saying I'm going to regret threatening them. Helen sent me a message saying she wants to talk, just her and me, to work out a compromise. David hasn't reached out directly, but Miranda keeps saying he wants to meet with me and my lawyer to discuss terms. Terms like this is a negotiation, like they get to set the parameters after what they did. My lawyer says the divorce should be straightforward since we don't have kids and limited shared assets, but it could take a few months to finalize. The landlord agreed to remove my name from the lease effective next month as long as Miranda signs the updated agreement or the court orders it. She hasn't signed yet. She's stalling. My lawyer says that's common. People stall when they don't want to accept reality. Here's the new problem, though, and this is what I need advice on because it's getting complicated. Miranda showed up at my work 2 days ago. Just walked right into the warehouse during my shift. Security stopped her, but she was yelling my name across the floor. My supervisor had to get involved. She was screaming that I abandoned her. I left her with all the bills. She can't afford the rent on her own, and I'm forcing her into homelessness. Making a scene. I ended up having to leave the floor and talk to her in the parking lot just to get her to leave. She said her family is cutting her off financially unless I come back and work things out. David and Helen are furious that she let this situation get so out of control. They blame her for not keeping me in line. Those were her words, keeping me in line like I'm a dog that needs training. She said if I don't drop the divorce, her family will disown her. She'll lose her support system and she'll have nothing. She was crying again, begging me to reconsider. I told her she should have thought about that before sitting there smiling while her family destroyed me. She said she didn't know they were going to be that harsh. She thought they were just going to talk to me about being more ambitious. She didn't know about the post-nup until that night. She didn't know they'd been planning it for months. I called bull. The text messages proved she was part of the planning. She said those were taken out of context. Then she said something that made my blood run hot. She said if I don't drop the divorce and come back, she'll tell people I was abusive, that I controlled her finances, that I isolated her from her family, that she's afraid of me. She'd make sure everyone knew what kind of person I really was. I recorded that conversation on my phone. I started recording as soon as I walked out to the parking lot because I had a feeling she'd say something I'd need later. Got the whole thing, the threats, the manipulation, all of it. I told her to leave and not come back to my workplace or I'd file for a restraining order for harassment. She left, but she's not done. None of them are done. So, that's where I am now. Divorce in progress. Living on a friend's couch. Wife threatening to accuse me of abuse if I don't come back. Her family probably plotting their next move. And I'm just trying to get through each day without losing my mind. Reddit. What do I do about Miranda threatening false accusations? My lawyer says document everything and don't engage. But this feels like it's escalating fast. Quick update for everyone who's been following this mess. First, thank you to everyone who told me to save that recording of Miranda threatening me. I've got it backed up in like 5 different places now, and my lawyer has a copy. Some of you asked why I didn't just block Miranda and her family. Valid question. My lawyer said not to block anyone yet because we need to document their harassment for the divorce proceedings. Every text, every call, every attempt at contact shows the pattern of behavior. So, I'm letting them keep digging their own graves. Things have gotten complicated in the 3 weeks since my last update. And I mean complicated in ways I didn't see coming. Even though I should have known this family wouldn't just accept defeat and move on. First thing that happened was the apartment situation exploded. Miranda refused to sign the lease modification that would remove my name. My lawyer said, fine, we'll get a court order, but that takes time. Meanwhile, I'm still technically on the lease, which means I'm still technically liable for half the rent even though I'm not living there. I kept paying my half into the joint account for bills like I'd been doing. But then Miranda drained the entire joint account, just emptied it, about $1,200 that was supposed to cover rent and utilities. My lawyer said that's technically not illegal since it was a joint account. And she had equal access, but it screwed me over because now the rent check bounced and the landlord is coming after both of us. I had to pay the full rent out of my separate account to avoid eviction proceedings that would trash my credit. $1,850 for an apartment I'm not even living in. Miranda's been staying there, but she's apparently not paying anything. When I confronted her about it through text, she said she doesn't have the money because her family cut her off like she warned me they would. She said, this is my fault for filing for divorce, and now she can't afford to live. She asked if I was happy that I'd made her destitute. I told her to get a job. She works part-time at her sister's husband's car dealership, doing administrative stuff, maybe 15 hours a week, making probably $12 an hour. It's not real work to her. It's just something to do. She's always relied on her family money and my income to cover everything else now that I'm not paying for her lifestyle and her family isn't supplementing it. She's actually having to face reality. She didn't like that response. She said I was being cruel and heartless and she couldn't believe I'd become this person. Here's where it gets messy. Braden showed up at Alan's apartment where I've been staying. I don't know how he found out where Alan lives. I didn't tell anyone in Miranda's family where I was staying specifically. Alan thinks Miranda might have followed me from work one day and figured it out. Either way, Braden knocked on the door on a Thursday evening around 7 o'clock. Alan answered and Braden asked to speak to me. Alan is a solid guy, told Braden I wasn't interested in talking to him, but I heard the commotion and came to the door anyway because I wanted to hear what he had to say. Braden was standing there in his business casual outfit looking like he'd come straight from his finance job. He said we needed to talk man-to-man without lawyers, without family drama, just the two of us. Alan stayed in the doorway, but let me step outside onto the porch. I wasn't inviting Braden inside, and he wasn't getting past Alan anyway. Braden started with the reasonable approach. He said, "Look, this whole situation got out of hand. The family dinner was a bad idea, and they handled it wrong." He personally thought I was overreacting, but he could understand why I got upset. He said David and Helen were willing to apologize if I dropped the divorce and came back. They'd help me and Miranda find a better place to live. Maybe help with a car payment so I could get something newer than the Corolla. They'd stop commenting on my job and my education. They just wanted their daughter to be happy, and if I made her happy, they'd accept that. I asked him if he thought I was stupid. He looked confused. I told him they spent months planning that dinner. They coordinated text messages about how to humiliate me. They drafted a post-nup design to leave me with nothing. And now, after I stood up for myself, suddenly they were sorry and wanted to help. That's not an apology, that's a strategy. They realized the intimidation didn't work, so now they're trying manipulation. Braden dropped the reasonable act pretty fast. He said, "But if I wanted to be difficult about it, they'd make things difficult for me. They'd drag the divorce out as long as possible, rack up legal fees I couldn't afford, and make sure Miranda got everything she was entitled to. They had resources and connections. What did I have? A friend's couch and a warehouse job. I could play tough all I wanted, but eventually I'd run out of money and energy and I'd settle for whatever scraps they offered me." I told him to tell David and Helen that I wasn't settling. I had evidence of their harassment. I had recordings of Miranda threatening me. I had documentation of all of it. If they wanted to spend tens of thousands of dollars on lawyers to fight over an apartment lease and some used furniture, that was their choice. But I'd make sure everyone they knew saw exactly what kind of people they were. Braden said that was a mistake. Their social circle wouldn't care what I had to say. I was nobody. They were established members of their community. Who would people believe? A successful business owner and his family, or a warehouse worker with a grudge? I asked him if he was really that confident about it because all I had to do was send those text message screenshots to a few key people and let them draw their own conclusions. People love drama. People love seeing wealthy families turn out to be garbage humans. He left after that. Told me I'd regret making an enemy of his family. I went back inside and Alan asked if I was okay. I said, "Yeah, just more of the same intimidation tactics." Alan said I could stay as long as I needed and not to worry about Braden showing up again. He'd make sure of it. Good guy, Alan. 2 days after Braden's visit, I got served with papers, not the divorce papers. Those were still processing. These were from Miranda's new lawyer. She was suing me for spousal support during the separation. She claimed I'd abandoned her financially and she couldn't maintain her standard of living without my income. She wanted $800 a month in temporary support until the divorce was finalized. $800 from my $38,000 a year salary while she was living rent-free in an apartment I was still paying for. My lawyer laughed when I showed him the filing. Actually laughed. He said there was no way a judge would grant that given our financial situation and the fact that Miranda was capable of working full-time, but chose not to. We'd fight it and probably win, but it meant more legal fees and more time in court. More of my money and energy spent on this nightmare. Then the landlord got involved in a way I wasn't expecting. He sent both me and Miranda a letter saying he was tired of the drama. The bounced rent check, the lease dispute, me not living there but still on the lease. He said if we didn't sort this out within 30 days, he was going to start eviction proceedings against both of us and keep the security deposit to cover his hassle and lost time. $1,000 security deposit down the drain. I told my lawyer and he said we needed to push for an emergency hearing to get my name off the lease and force Miranda to either take over the full rent or move out. But emergency hearings aren't actually that fast. We're looking at maybe 3 weeks if we're lucky. Meanwhile, I'm hemorrhaging money paying for an apartment I don't live in and potentially facing eviction on my record if Miranda doesn't cooperate. Miranda has been texting me constantly about the eviction threat. She's panicking. She can't afford the rent on her own and her family won't help her. She keeps saying I need to come back. We can work this out. She'll be a better wife. She'll stand up to her family more. She'll make sure they respect me. She's sorry about the dinner and the texts and everything. She just wants things to go back to normal. I asked her what normal meant. She said when we were happy before all this fighting started. I told her we were never happy. I was just too busy working and too tired to notice how miserable I was until her family spelled it out for me. She said that wasn't true. We had good times. I asked her to name one. She couldn't. She just kept saying we were good together and I was throwing it all away. Here's the thing though, and this is what's really eating at me. The more I think about the timeline, the more I realize Miranda's family didn't just randomly decide I wasn't good enough. They had a reason. They had a specific reason for planning that dinner and trying to get me to sign that postnup. I started looking back at when their attitude toward me really shifted. It was about 2 years ago. Before that, they were dismissive and condescending, but not actively hostile. 2 years ago, something changed. They started being more aggressive about questioning my job, my future, my plans. Helen started making comments about how Miranda needed to think about her future and whether I was the right partner for that. David started asking me pointed questions about my salary and my retirement account. I asked Miranda about this during one of our text arguments. What happened 2 years ago that made her family go from general disapproval to active campaign to get rid of me? She said nothing happened. They'd always thought I wasn't good enough. I said, no, it escalated. Something specific happened. She didn't answer for like 6 hours and then she just said her family had concerns and I needed to stop interrogating her. That's when I remembered something. 2 years ago, Miranda's grandmother on David's side passed away. Helen's mother-in-law. There was a funeral, estate stuff, family meetings I wasn't invited to. And right after that is when the family's attitude toward me got noticeably worse. I asked Miranda if her grandmother left an inheritance. She said that was private family business. I said, we're married. It's not private from me. She said, yes, there was an inheritance, but it went to the family, not to her specifically. I looked up inheritance laws in our state. Anything inherited during a marriage is generally considered separate property, not marital property, unless it gets commingled with marital assets. If Miranda received a direct inheritance and kept it separate, I'd have no claim to it in a divorce. But if she deposited it in our joint account or used it for joint expenses, it might become marital property. I checked our old joint account statements from 2 years ago. There was a deposit of $85,000. In October 2 years ago, $85,000. Description said estate settlement. It sat in the account for about 2 months and then got moved somewhere else. I don't know where because that account doesn't show external transfers, but for 2 months that money was in our joint account, commingled. That's why they panicked. That's why they planned the ambush dinner. They were afraid I'd figure out about the inheritance and go after it in the divorce. That's why the postnup was so aggressive. They wanted to make sure I couldn't touch any family money, including any inheritance Miranda might have received or might receive in the future. I sent this theory to my lawyer. He said it was worth investigating. If Miranda received an inheritance and it was temporarily in our joint account, there might be an argument that it became marital property or at least partially marital property. He said he'd issue a discovery request for all of Miranda's financial records, including any inheritance documentation. When Miranda found out about the discovery request, she lost it. She called me 17 times in one day. She left voicemails screaming about how I was trying to steal her grandmother's money, how I was proving her family right about what kind of person I was, how I had no right to family money that had nothing to do with me. I didn't answer any of the calls. I let her spiral. Then Helen called me. First time she tried to contact me directly since the dinner. She said we needed to meet and discuss the situation before it got more out of control. She wanted to meet at a park near her house, just the two of us, to talk about realistic solutions. I told her no. Anything she wanted to say could go through my lawyer. She said I was being unreasonable and immature. I said I learned from the best and hung up. David tried next. He sent me a text saying he wanted to have a conversation about expectations and boundaries. He said maybe we'd all gotten too emotional and it was time for cooler heads to prevail. He suggested we meet at his office to discuss a fair settlement for everyone. I texted back that I wasn't interested in anything they considered fair. He responded that I was forcing them to take aggressive legal action and I'd regret not trying to work things out amicably. I didn't respond after that. The latest development is that Brinley showed up at the grocery store where I shop. I don't think she followed me. I think she just knew which store was closest to Alan's apartment and figured I'd show up eventually. She was waiting near the entrance when I walked in last Wednesday. She approached me and said she wanted to talk. I kept walking. She followed me through the store, talking at me while I picked up bread and milk and frozen dinners. She said I needed to understand that Miranda was struggling. She'd lost weight. She wasn't sleeping. She was depressed. The family was worried about her. This whole divorce was destroying her and it didn't have to be this way. I could still back out. I could still be the bigger person and work things out. Brinley said she knew the dinner was wrong, but it came from a place of love. They loved Miranda and they wanted the best for her. Maybe they went about it the wrong way, but their intentions were good. I stopped in the middle of the frozen food aisle and turned around. I told Brinley that intentions don't matter when the actions are cruel. They could have talked to me like an adult. They could have had a conversation. Instead, they ambushed me with 15 people and spent an hour listing my failures as a human being while Miranda sat there smiling. That wasn't love. That was control. They wanted to control who Miranda was with and how she lived her life. And I wasn't acceptable to them. So they tried to eliminate me. Brinley said I was making Miranda sound like a victim when I was the one who filed for divorce and abandoned her. I said Miranda was 31 years old. She was an adult who made her own choices. She chose to sit there during that dinner. She chose to lie to me for over a year. She chose to drain our joint account and force me to cover rent I shouldn't have to pay. Those were her choices. Her family influenced her, but she still made the decisions. Brinley said family is complicated and I wouldn't understand because I didn't come from their kind of background. I asked what that meant. She said families like theirs had certain standards and expectations and ways of doing things that outsiders didn't get. I said that sounded like she was calling me too poor and too stupid to understand rich people problems. She backtracked and said that wasn't what she meant, but I'd already walked away, so that's where things are now. Divorce still processing, lease situations still a disaster. Discovery request filed for Miranda's financial records. Her family escalating their pressure campaign. Miranda getting more desperate. Legal fees piling up on both sides and me still sleeping on Alan's couch trying to figure out how much more of my life I'm going to have to spend dealing with these people. My lawyer says we should have a court date within 6 weeks for the preliminary hearing on asset division and temporary support. That's when we'll present the inheritance evidence and argue about the apartment lease and all the rest of it. 6 more weeks of this. The problem is I'm running out of money faster than I expected. Legal fees are eating through my savings. I'm still covering rent on the apartment. I'm paying Alan some money for crashing at his place, even though he says I don't have to. Work is stable, but the stress is affecting my performance. I'm tired all the time. I'm angry all the time. I wake up thinking about what Miranda's family did, and I go to sleep thinking about it. Reddit. I need to know if going after that inheritance money is worth it. My lawyer thinks we have a case, but it's going to cost more in legal fees to fight for it. Is it worth draining my savings to potentially get a share of money that might not even be accessible anymore? Or should I just cut my losses, get the divorce finalized as fast as possible, and move on with my life? And what do I do about Miranda's family continuing to harass me? They're not technically doing anything illegal. They're just showing up places and trying to talk to me and making my life difficult. How do I make them stop without getting a restraining order that might make me look like the bad guy? Help me figure this out because I'm barely holding it together. The reason. Final update. You were absolutely right. The court hearing happened yesterday. Leading up to the hearing, things got even more intense. Miranda's lawyer tried to get the discovery request thrown out, claiming the inheritance was separate property, and I had no right to any information about it. My lawyer argued that because the money was deposited in our joint account, even temporarily, it became relevant to asset division. The judge sided with us and ordered Miranda to provide full documentation of the inheritance, including where the money went after it left our joint account. Miranda stalled for 2 weeks. Her lawyer kept filing extensions and claiming they needed more time to gather documents. My lawyer said that was a red flag. If the money was truly separate property and properly handled, the documentation should be simple. The fact that they were stalling meant something was wrong with their story. During those 2 weeks, the harassment from Miranda's family got worse, but also more desperate. David sent me multiple texts trying to negotiate. He offered to pay me $10,000 to drop the inheritance claim and finalize the divorce quickly. I didn't respond. Then he offered $15,000, then $20,000. When each offer came within a few days of the last one, my lawyer said the escalating offers meant they were panicking. If the inheritance was properly protected, they wouldn't be trying to buy me off. Helen showed up at my workplace again. Security stopped her this time before she got to the warehouse floor, but she was in the parking lot when my shift ended. She approached me and said we needed to talk about Miranda's well-being. She said Miranda was falling apart, barely eating, not functioning. The family was worried she might hurt herself if this divorce continued to drag out. Helen said I needed to think about what I was doing to her daughter. I told Helen that Miranda was a grown adult responsible for her own choices and her own mental health. If she was struggling, her family should get her actual help instead of using her well-being as a manipulation tactic against me. Helen said I was being heartless. I said I learned from the best and walked to my car. She followed me, still talking about how I was destroying their family and I'd regret not trying to work things out. I got in my car and drove away while she was mid-sentence. The weekend before the hearing, Braden sent me a long text. He said the family was willing to make one final offer. They'd pay off my car, give me $25,000 cash, help me get a better apartment, and make sure the divorce was finalized within 30 days with no further legal action. All I had to do was sign a settlement agreement stating I had no claim to any inheritance money, and I wouldn't discuss the family or the divorce with anyone outside of necessary legal proceedings. Basically, they wanted to buy my silence and my cooperation. I showed the text to my lawyer. He said $25,000 was significant money, but if the inheritance claim was as strong as we thought, I might be entitled to considerably more than that. He said it was my choice, but the fact that they were now offering serious money meant we were probably on the right track. I told him to proceed with the hearing. I wasn't taking their settlement. I wanted to see them squirm in court. The hearing was set for Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. I showed up with my lawyer. Miranda was there with her lawyer. David, Helen, and Braden were sitting in the gallery behind Miranda's table. They all looked tense. Miranda looked terrible. She definitely lost weight. She looked exhausted. Part of me almost felt bad for her, but then I remembered her sitting at that dinner table smiling while her family destroyed me. The judge called us to order and asked Miranda's lawyer to present the inheritance documentation. The lawyer handed over a folder. The judge reviewed it for a few minutes and then asked some questions. When did Miranda receive the inheritance? How much was it? Where was it deposited? Where did it go after that? Miranda's lawyer confirmed that Miranda received $85,000 from her grandmother's estate in October 2 years ago. It was deposited in our joint checking account on October 15th. It remained in that account until December 3rd when it was transferred to a separate account in Miranda's name only. The lawyer argued that the money was only in the joint account temporarily for processing purposes and Miranda had always intended to keep it as separate property. My lawyer stood up and asked why. If Miranda intended to keep the inheritance separate, she deposited it in a joint account in the first place. Why not have the estate settlement go directly to her personal account? Miranda's lawyer said it was the account the estate had on file for her. My lawyer said that didn't make sense because Miranda had her own personal checking account before the inheritance. We had bank statements showing both a joint account and her separate personal account existed at the time. The judge asked Miranda to explain. Miranda said the estate lawyer suggested using the joint account because it was easier to process. My lawyer asked if she had documentation of that suggestion. She didn't. My lawyer then asked what happened to the $85,000 after it was moved to her separate account. Miranda said it was invested. My lawyer asked for documentation of the investments. Miranda's lawyer provided statements showing the money was moved into a brokerage account in Miranda's name. Here's where it got interesting. My lawyer pointed out that according to the brokerage statements, only $60,000 was invested. He asked what happened to the other $25,000. Miranda said she didn't know. She'd have to check her records. The judge said we could wait while she checked. Miranda and her lawyer had a whispered conversation. Miranda looked panicked. Her lawyer asked for a recess to review the documents. The judge said, "No, answer the question now." Miranda finally admitted she'd given $25,000 to her parents. My lawyer asked why. She said it was a loan. They needed money for business expenses and she'd loan it to them with the understanding they'd pay her back. My lawyer asked if there was a loan agreement. She said no. It was a family loan. They didn't do formal paperwork. My lawyer asked if any payments had been made on the loan. She said not yet, but they would. My lawyer then presented our evidence. Text messages between Miranda and Helen from 2 years ago discussing the inheritance. Helen saying they needed to make sure I never found out about the full amount. Miranda saying she'd move the money quickly so I wouldn't have time to think about it. Helen saying they should give some to David for his business before I could make any claims on it. Miranda agreeing. Multiple texts discussing how to hide the inheritance from me and protect it from divorce. The judge read through the texts. David and Helen were sitting behind Miranda looking like they wanted to disappear. Braden had his head in his hands. Miranda was crying. Her lawyer was trying to object, but the judge told him to be quiet. My lawyer argued that the inheritance was deposited in a joint account where it remained for 7 weeks. During that time, Miranda and I used that joint account for shared expenses. Money went in and out. The inheritance money became commingled with marital funds. Additionally, Miranda and her family had clearly intended to hide the money from me, which showed they knew there was a potential claim. The $25,000 given to her parents was effectively a transfer of marital assets to a third party to avoid division in divorce. The judge asked Miranda's lawyer to respond. He tried to argue that the texts were taken out of context and the temporary deposit didn't make the inheritance marital property. My lawyer countered that 7 weeks wasn't temporary. It was intentional commingling. The judge agreed. She said that based on the evidence, the inheritance had been commingled with marital assets, and Miranda had taken deliberate steps to hide it and transfer portions of it to avoid division. The judge ruled that I was entitled to 40% of the inheritance value, not half, because the money did originate as separate property, but 40% because it was commingled and improperly handled. That's $34,000 based on the original $85,000. The judge ordered Miranda to pay me $34,000 within 90 days, either from the remaining invested funds or by other means. If Miranda couldn't pay, her parents would be liable for the $25,000 they received, plus interest, which could be garnished from their assets to satisfy the judgment. Miranda absolutely lost it. She started crying harder and saying, "This wasn't fair. It was her grandmother's money. I had no right to it." Her lawyer tried to calm her down. The judge told her the decision was made and if she wanted to appeal, she could file the proper paperwork. Then the judge moved on to the other issues, the apartment lease. The judge ordered my name removed from the lease immediately. Miranda would be solely responsible for rent going forward. If she couldn't afford it, she needed to give proper notice to the landlord and move out. I was not responsible for any future rent payments. The $1,850 I'd paid to cover the bounced rent check would be counted as a credit against what I owed Miranda from the inheritance judgment, reducing my payment to $32,150, the credit card debt. The judge ruled that since Miranda opened the cards in both our names without my knowledge and made all the charges herself, she was responsible for the full $4,000 debt. That debt would not be considered an asset division, the spousal support request. The judge denied it completely. Miranda was capable of working full-time and had chosen not to. She had family resources even if they were currently withholding support. There was no basis for temporary spousal support. The divorce itself. The judge set a final hearing date for 60 days out to finalize everything once Miranda paid the inheritance settlement. In the meantime, we were legally separated and the preliminary orders were in effect immediately. Miranda's whole family looked devastated. David was red-faced and angry. Helen was crying. Braden looked like he'd been punched. Miranda was still sobbing. My lawyer and I walked out of the courtroom and I felt this massive weight lift off me. We'd won. We'd actually won. Outside the courthouse, David caught up with us. He said this wasn't over. He said they'd appeal every decision. They'd tie this up for years if they had to. My lawyer said that was his right. But the preliminary orders were in effect regardless, and appeals rarely succeeded in family court when the evidence was this clear. David said I'd pay for this. I'd pay for taking advantage of his daughter and stealing family money. I told him I didn't steal anything. A judge ordered a fair division of assets based on Miranda's own actions. If he wanted to blame someone, he should blame his daughter for depositing inheritance money in our joint account and himself for taking $25,000 of it. Helen came out next and she was furious. She said I was a disgusting person for going after Miranda's grandmother's money. That money was supposed to be for Miranda's future, for her security, and I was taking it out of spite. I said Miranda made choices about how to handle that money. She could have kept it completely separate. She chose not to. She chose to deposit it in our joint account. She chose to give a chunk of it to her parents. Those were her choices. I was just following the logical consequences of those choices. Braden said I'd better watch my back. The family had connections and resources, and I'd made enemies of all of them. My lawyer stepped in and said any threats would be reported to the court and could affect the ongoing case. Braden backed off, but said they'd make sure I never worked in this town again. I reminded him I worked in a warehouse, not in his finance world, and his connections meant nothing to my employer. We left and went back to my lawyer's office to review the next steps. He said I needed to wait for Miranda to come up with the $32,150. She had 90 days. If she couldn't pay from the invested inheritance funds, we could go after her parents for the $25,000 plus interest since the judge had made them liable. That could mean putting liens on their property or garnishing bank accounts. He said the family would likely try to settle before it got to that point. I asked what happened if they just refused to pay. He said the court could hold them in contempt and impose penalties. They could end up paying more in fines and interest than the original judgment. Rich people usually didn't let things get that far because it affected their credit and their reputation. They'd pay. They might drag it out, but they'd pay. I went back to Alan's place and told him everything. He said I should celebrate. I'd fought a family with money and lawyers and connections, and I'd won. Not many people could say that. He offered to take me out for drinks, but I was exhausted. I just wanted to sleep for about 12 hours. That was 2 days ago. Since then, Miranda has called me 43 times. I've answered 0. She sent me over 100 texts. Most of them are begging me to reconsider, to work out a payment plan to accept less money. Some of them are angry, calling me a thief and saying I destroyed her life. Some of them are manipulative, saying she loves me and we can still work this out. I haven't responded to any of them. Her family has been messaging me too. Helen sent me a long text about how I've destroyed their family's trust in their relationship with Miranda. She said Miranda is in therapy now because of the stress I've put her through. She said I should be ashamed of myself. I blocked her number. David sent me a text saying they're liquidating some assets to pay the judgment because they don't want it hanging over them. He said I should be happy that I've taken food out of their mouths and caused them financial hardship. He said Miranda might have to move back in with them because she can't afford rent on her own. I blocked his number too. Braden sent me a message saying I'm everything they thought I was. A leech who married into a family for money and took advantage of their generosity. He said karma would catch up with me. I blocked him too. The only person I haven't blocked is Miranda because my lawyer said to keep the line of communication open in case she tries to negotiate the payment. But I'm not responding to her emotional manipulation. If she wants to talk about payment arrangements, she can go through her lawyer. Here's what I've learned through all this. That family ambush dinner wasn't about me not being good enough. It was never about my job or my car or my education. It was about control and money. They knew Miranda had received a significant inheritance. They knew she'd handled it poorly by putting it in our joint account. They knew that if I ever found out and we got divorced, I might have a claim to some of it. So, they tried to intimidate me into signing a postnup that would protect everything, including that inheritance. They tried to make me feel so worthless and small that I'd take their $5,000 in their bus ticket and just disappear. But I didn't. I stood up for myself. I documented everything. I found the leverage. I used the legal system the same way they tried to use it against me. And I won. The $32,150 I'm getting is more than I make in a year. It's going to change my situation completely. I can move into my own place. I can fix the windshield on my Corolla or maybe even get a better car. I can build up my savings. I can stop sleeping on Alan's couch, though he's been great about it. Miranda's family lost $34,000 they were trying to protect. They lost control of the situation. They lost the power dynamic they'd had over me. David and Helen might have to liquidate assets to pay the judgment. Miranda has to pay rent on her own or move back in with her parents at age 31. Their plan to get rid of me backfired in the most expensive way possible. I'm not going to lie and say I feel good about any of this. I'm angry. I'm tired. I'm frustrated that I had to spend months of my life fighting people who should have just left me alone. But I'm also satisfied. They thought I was nothing. They thought I'd roll over. They thought they could humiliate me into submission. They invited me to that family dinner to tell me I wasn't good enough. I walked out with papers that proved they were the ones who weren't good enough. They tried to take everything from me. I ended up taking from them. That's it. That's the story. Thanks for following along and for all the support. For anyone dealing with something similar, document everything. Know your rights and don't let people treat you like you're disposable just because they think they're better than you.